Hello and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. I am Allysia, your host, and today we are going to do a tutorial, and we haven't done one of these for a while, so I thought it would be nice to sit down and learn a piece that I really enjoy teaching by Grieg. It's called Arietta, and it's an intermediate level piece. It's really beautiful, a little bit melancholic, really sweet, and yeah, I just really like teaching it, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. So how this video is going to work is we're going to talk a little bit about the piece's backstory, and we're going to play through it and analyze it, talk about some just like interesting practice points that I find interesting. We'll talk a little bit about harmony and just things like that. So let's just jump into it. So one thing I find with my students is that they're generally really eager to get into Liszt and Chopin, but Liszt and Chopin don't really have easy music. Liszt especially, like his easiest music is around a grade 8 level, whereas Chopin does have like a few grade 6, 7 pieces, but like the bulk of his compositions are much more difficult than that. So this Arietta by Grieg is a good gateway into more difficult romantic music because it involves a lot of the same elements, but it's a little bit easier to execute. And it's also nice and short. It's only one page. So one easier collection of Liszt music that maybe you're wanting to approach are his consolations. So again, I would start here and maybe do some a few other entry level romantic, not that this is entry level, this is like solidly intermediate. It's not even that easy, but I would work through pieces like this before getting into consolations. Grieg's collection of lyric pieces in general is just excellent. I really like it. There's a bunch of volumes, and the Opus 12 volume, which is the one that Arietta's from, is the easiest. They range in difficulty everywhere from about grade 5 to grade 10. So they're kind of all over the map, but most of the easiest pieces are in that first Opus 12. They're cool. Like they're a bunch of little miniatures, and they explore a huge range of moods, scenes, characters, ideas, and they sound good. They're fun to play. They're a lot of fun. We are going to talk more about Grieg in the future here too, so watch this space. One thing I always like to do before getting into the tutorial is just to talk about the backstory of the piece that we're talking about. Grieg's Lyric Pieces, which is a collection of music that includes 66 pieces and I believe 10 volumes, is from the Romantic period. Grieg composed it between 1867 and 1901. So it covers a wide swath of his growth as a musician. And Arietta, the piece we're going to be looking at today, Opus 12, number 1, is the very, very first one in the set of 66. So this would have been composed when Grieg was in his mid-20s. Most of the pieces and lyric pieces are short and sweet. Like you're not going to be finding 20-minute epic compositions here, like Liszt-style things. Arietta is no exception. It's actually a full runtime of it. It's probably about a minute and a half. It has a clear, sweet melody. It has a melancholic but overall positive mood, and it feels influenced by Chopin and Liszt's romantic piano style. I find it just really appealing, and once you get the hang of it, it's a little tricky to get the hang of it first. Once you get the hang of it, it's very beautiful and quite fun to play. It also makes a good study in harmony, which we'll be discussing a little bit as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to play through it, we're going to listen to it, and then we're going to dissect it and talk about it. first things I like to do with finding out a new piece are to figure out the key signature. This one's in the key of E flat major because it has 3 flats, and E flat major is the first chord. So those are both like the 2 main indicators of the key. So once I figure out the key, I also like to figure out the overall like mood, what's the idea of the piece. And what you want to look at for this a lot of the times in classical music is the title. So what does the title suggest? Arietta, well, we'll talk about that. The tempo marking, poco andante e sostenuto. What's that telling us? So anyway, to answer these, so let's back up. Let's talk about what an arietta. Let's talk about what an arietta is. The dictionary says a short aria. Very, very useful. Okay, so then what's an aria? An aria is an elaborate melody sung solo with accompaniment, as in an opera or oratorio. When piano composers use aria, they're basically saying their piece has a lyrical melody, a melody that you would sing. And this gives us quite a bit of information about how to play the piece right off the bat. Secondly, this is also going to give us a lot of information. The tempo marking, poco andante e sostenuto. If we break that down, so andante is a term that a lot of us learn in the first year or so. It means walking speed. This is really useful because, you know, how fast or slow you play something. If you were playing this at presto, this would be a much more difficult pattern to play. Poco is a little. E sostenuto is and sustained. So you basically interpret that as a little sustained and at a walking speed. So at this point, we haven't even pressed a single key on the piano, but we have a lot more information about the piece just by going over a few basic details. The next thing to look at is the structure of the piece. It's actually really simple in this case. I just mark it as A and A1 because it's basically the same material twice, only the second time there are some slight changes towards the end of the piece. But again, this is more good information. It means that instead of having to play an entire page of like all original material, there's going to be a lot of repetition in the second half. Usually what happens with this piece is I'll assign it and then my students will look at it and then they won't practice it. I mean, I get it. It looks tough, especially for a grade 5 level-ish student, grade 6 level. There are a lot of notes, but once you can work your way around all the notes, it's not as tricky as it looks, basically. The first step, though, is to find the melody, isolate it, and play it. I even recommend, if you're up for it, and pretty much everyone should be able to do this, doesn't matter if you're a good singer, is sing through the melody, because that's going to help you understand how to play it more beautifully. Lucky for us, the melody is really easy to find and isolate because it's all of the high notes in the piece. So every single note that's in the high register with the stem going up like that is the melody. Those of you who are into music theory might be wondering why the stems are going up like this with the top notes. Because in normal notation, the stems would be going down. The reason for this is just to isolate the melody and separate it from the non-melody. So it's to indicate that all of these notes are a totally different part from the notes underneath it. Working in 4-bar phrases, start to play through the melody. Now, don't worry about getting the perfect fingering yet. Like, you're just basically trying to get a sense of the tune. Do try to play it as beautifully as you can. And I would add the pedal in right from the get-go. Just simple. And then once you play through the whole melody and you're comfortable with that, it's time to look at the other 2 voices in the piece. The other 2 voices in Arietta are the bass part and the middle part. The bass part is easy to see since it's the lowest notes of the entire piece. And the stems are going downward to indicate that it's the bass line. You'll notice every single bass note, the stem is pointing down. And then the inner voice is divided between the hands. So we have them in the upper left hand and the lower right hand. Do the same thing with the bass notes now that you did with the melody. Play through the bass notes to get a feel for it. And it should be pretty straightforward to sight read if you're an intermediate level student because there's not a lot of crazy notes. Like the first line is really easy. Just a tied E flat. And then we have some walking notes. That repeats. And then some more held notes. But you just want to hear what it's supposed to sound like. What I would do next is try to play the melody and the bass line together. You are going to be focusing on keeping the melody beautiful but the bass is going to help give it a little bit more shape, make it sound a little bit more interesting. And for now, we are completely ignoring the inner notes. So I would just do something like this. I'm going to start from the second line because it's a little bit more interesting. Gives everything a little bit more definition that way. So when you get the hang of playing the bass and the melody, you can start looking at the inner notes, which is the middle voice. Like I mentioned, it's divided between two hands evenly. And you'll notice that it tends to move in pairs. So the left hand will play 2 notes, and then the right hand plays 2 notes, and so on. And these are basically outlining broken chords. One challenge of playing a piece with multiple voices is to bring out the melody notes so that they ring out loud and clear above the harmony notes. In this case, the highest notes are going to be the melody, so they're going to be the loud ones. Now, what I mean by bringing them out, so we want these to, you don't want the ear to have to strain to hear them. You want them to just be hearable right away. So here's with the note standing out. Everything around it is nice and quiet. Now, if all my fingers played at an equal volume, it doesn't ring out above. So you really need to spend some time working. It's mainly going to be your pinky, but some other notes too, like finger 4 and 3 sometimes as well. I even lean into those notes a little bit just to remind myself to keep those upper notes louder than the others. If you're not sure, just record yourself playing and see if you can hear the melody clearly, and if not, then you have more work to do. And I just want to give you one more note about the melody. There's so many repeated notes. We have 5 G's in a row, and then 5 F's in a row. Whoops. When you have so many repeated notes in a row, it can sound kind of boring and unpleasant without just a little bit of variation. Think about singing. If you're singing this it's okay, get on with it. It sounds a little bit drone-like. So what you want to do is you want to add a little bit of variation so it sounds nice. So if you were singing this, you might be you might add a little vibrato here. You might do a little bend here. You do things like that with your voice. On the piano, we don't have that much control, but what we can control is the volume and the way we're hitting the note. So instead of just kind of clunking, maybe try doing a crescendo, where there's a different volume for each note, so it's not just a straight line of all the same stuff. To create a beautiful melody, we not only need to vary the tone from one note to the next, but we also want to pay attention to the phrasing. And some editions are going to have it marked in, some aren't. The edition that I have from imslp.org, it is not marked in, but you can very easily do it yourself or just kind of imagine it. In general, this piece moves in 2-bar phrases. So what that means is that at the end of each of the 2 bars, there's a natural pause in the melody, a little break. So if you were singing this melody, these spots would be where you breathe. We want to keep these natural rests in mind when we're playing on the piano. So be sure your melody note doesn't drag through bars 2 and 3. Right here. You want a little lift, because they're 2 separate ideas. It's important in arias and ariettas and things like this to emulate the sound of a human voice. And that's where, if you were singing, that's where you would be taking your breath. You'll also notice little dynamics, like little crescendos and diminuendos, which I kind of already explained. They follow the natural shape of the phrase. So it's as the phrase goes on, it gets a little louder. And then as the phrase finishes, it gets a little bit quieter. It has this swelling and retracting pattern. It's really common in music, and even if your music doesn't indicate it, it oftentimes sounds very, very lovely to play a phrase with this sweeping feel where we go a little louder and then a little quieter. And then kind of taper off at the end, like the human voice would. Some editions will have the pedal marked in, and others might just say ped at the beginning. You'll be pedaling in syncopated style. And if you've never done syncopated pedaling before, this piece isn't the place to learn that technique. Do check out our video on it and go back and practice syncopated pedaling in easier pieces first. This piece requires a good ear for pedaling because it's really easy to overdo it. The idea is to create like a nice smoothness with the pedal, but it's really easy for things to get muddy and blurry. Depending on the notes, I tend to lift about once or twice per bar. I'm going to play from the second bar. Yeah. So I'm lifting twice a bar in the second line especially because we have a new chord change every two lines. And I'm just making sure to really listen. Even just a little bit of over pedaling, which might be not lifting your foot up far enough, for example, or not lifting at all. It's just things start jarring together. It gets a little bit yucky. So that's just something to listen for. Finally, let's talk about the harmony. And I'm going to really try to rein it in and not get super carried away and talk about this for the next hour, even though I want to because I like talking about harmony. Studying harmony isn't something that you have to do, and it's something that I've kind of developed a love of over the years. I didn't used to do it, but I do think that chords are interesting, and I always learn something when I study them in a piece. It really helps you get inside the piece, and practicing chords is a skill that takes time to build, like anything else. So what I mean, like not just like playing the chords, but being able to identify them. It's kind of like, I get a lot of pleasure out of doing this, almost like if you were to do math problems. That's kind of how I feel about figuring out chords, but with more value at the end, in my opinion. One common chord progression is to go from the tonic to the dominant seventh. So when we're in the key of E flat, that basically means from going from E flat to B flat 7 chord. Now Grieg changes it up a little bit in the first line. So he goes, instead of from the tonic to the dominant, he goes to the diminished 7th leading tone. So the 7th note of the scale, but diminished. And these two chords are, so B flat 7 is B flat, D, F, A flat. D diminished 7th chord is D, F, A flat. Oh, I already have this written down there. C flat. So you'll notice these notes are almost, like these are almost identical chords. The only difference is the C flat and the B flat. So because of this, the 7th note of a scale makes a really, really good substitution for the dominant. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I've talked about harmony a lot on this channel before, and this is a little bit more advanced, so if you're a beginner, don't worry about any of this stuff. If you're a beginner, you probably shouldn't be playing this anyway. So hopefully you're able to follow me if you're at an appropriate intermediate level, which is when I would be teaching this piece. And then we have this really interesting chord progression in the second line that we walk through twice. C minor, E flat, A, diminished 7, and G minor. So if I were to write this out in Roman numerals, that would be like going from the submediant to the tonic to the, this is kind of a weird choice, but the subdominant diminished 7th to the mediant. So what we're getting from this is like tension, release. Tension, release. And I'll show you on the keyboard. Isn't that such an unusual progression? We have, so C minor, E, A diminished to G minor, C minor, E flat, A diminished 7, G minor, just to hear it on the piano. Note that the G minor could also be rightly interpreted as an E flat minor 7. Basically, I just wanted to kind of say that for the music theory nerds of you. This is like to point it out. And the reason for that is because the chord, if you hear all of these together, those are technically the 4 notes of an E flat major 7. But I interpret this as a G minor just because that's like the overwhelming sound of it to me. And the E flat is just kind of like just to add a little bit of dissonance, but it doesn't really change the flavor of the chord. But it could be labeled as E flat major or minor 7. This progression basically has the sound of sad to tonic, then tense, and then to tonic. So I'll show you what I mean. Sad to tonic. So we feel a little bit relaxed. And then we have sad, or like tense, and then to tonic. So we have a little bit of a reprieve. So it's like, this is like this is how I teach in my class sometimes, and you really got to work with my my sound effects. And a full harmonic analysis of this piece would take ages, but this just gets you started thinking about it. It's really cool to dissect music like this, and I feel like there's a lot of value that you can glean from doing something like that. And that's all for today's video. I will have the sheet music linked to imslp.org. They have like a bunch of different versions of the sheet music for free if you'd like that. So you'll find that on the blog post that goes with this video, and you can also just go to imslp and find that as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye, guys. I thought it'd be nice to sit down, have a little halvesies at the piano,